Hi, everybody. This is Jared here again with the next episode of CX Disruptors. I've got a very cool guest today, Hans van Dam from the Conversation Design Institute. And now I will let him say a few words about himself.
Hi, good to see everybody. So my name is Hans van Dam. I'm one of the founders here at Conversation Design Institute. And what we do is we teach people the skill set that they need to create better chatbots that are more human-centered, inclusive, goal-oriented. So yeah, if you want to learn about that, that's kind of when you end up with CDI.
All right. Well, let's jump to the first question because I think it's a bit of a niche topic. So what exactly is conversation design? How is it different from, say, UX, user experience design, from graphic design?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair question. It's interesting, right? That there's some people say conversation design is part of UX design, or they say it's a completely different field. At the end of the day, you're having conversations as an organization with people. So it doesn't matter if those are your employees or your customers, your patients or your citizens. And conversation design, what we do is, more of those conversations are going to get powered by technology, by AI predominantly. So we're going to be powering a lot of those conversations with technology. And what does that look like? And that's kind of the problem that conversation designers try to solve. So you're designing that conversational experience, whereas UX design is sort of broader in scope, where you have more touch points and all of those different, it can be on different interfaces. So it's a broader spectrum. And then conversation design is more narrow and more deep. And what we've noticed is that there's a lot of concepts from user experience design that apply to conversation design. Principles like affordance, making sure that you're sticking to certain patterns that people are familiar with. So there's a lot of that UX theory and expertise that you can apply in conversation design, but you can't just take a UX designer and have them do conversation design, because then you stumble upon that conversation design has to do with language, linguistic patterns, and it becomes a very specific skill set. So they're very related. They use a lot of the same principles, because you could also say that a website is almost like a visual replacement of a conversation that you might have with a company, right?
In a sense,
so there's a lot that's transferable, but then when it comes to language and linguistics, it just becomes a very specific skill set in and of its own.
And so to be clear for everybody, so conversation design, conversation can be both digital, but it could also be voice. So it's independent of how you're having that conversation.
Yeah, and for us, so at CDI, what we teach people is sort of create voice-first, technology-agnostic experiences. So we try to teach you, like, what's the conversation that you want to have with your customer? What could that look like? And if you do that voice first, because voice, there's no visual real estate whatsoever. It's the most difficult. So if you can figure it out with voice, and you've crafted that conversation, then you can now use that on your voice channels, on your chat channels, in your app, on your website, et cetera, et cetera. So we take the conversation first, and then we start looking at the different applications and how to power that with technology.
I'm wondering, since you brought that up, so voice, while being natural and the first form of communication, right? Writing comes much later, is handicapped by this lack of, there's no touch screen, right? I can't show you a picture. I can't make you tap whatever it is, right? I can't take a picture of something. But I can do that with my phone. So when you're teaching this, is the default multimodal? Do you teach these completely separately, like only voice, only digital? Or is it, hey, these things are always going to come together, and they're not two separate things anymore?
Well, so if what you do is, if you design it voice first, so let's say I solved the problem entirely through voice, like just a conversation, we don't have any visual cues whatsoever, and I can solve the problem through voice, then that is really cool, because now I can use that everywhere. And then if I say I want to deploy this in chat, then I say, actually, this part of the conversation would be much easier and a better user experience if I use a picture to communicate that complex thing, right?
Yeah.
Or give them a button to click. But if I would now, let's say I build a chatbot and I say, let's use a picture here, let's use a button there. And now somebody says like, hey, this is a great use case that we also have in our call center. Can we do this via voice? Then you have bad news, because then it's like, oh, actually, no, we would have to redesign it to go voice first. So if you teach people sort of the fundamental skill of what is a conversation, what do we want it to look like, how do we pull it off with just words, then you're the most flexible. And that's kind of our philosophy. Like if you, as a company, master that skill and you built one capability around having that skill set, then you're the most flexible on all your channels and all your customer interactions.
So would it be fair to say that ultimately conversation design is just problem solving using language? Because I mean, we're not talking about conversations about philosophy or football or anything. Am I right? I mean, it's always to get something done.
Yeah, and I think that's also that's a great point, because I think a lot of times people think that conversation design or creating a chatbot is about making the most natural experience for people and having it be the most human-like. That's not the goal at all. The goal is to really understand what people want and use elements of conversations that make it easier for them to achieve their goals. It's kind of like, think about it as movies. When you watch a movie, people will use sentences and dialogue and it feels very natural, but nobody speaks that way, right?
Yeah.
If you compare that to how people speak in real, it's fake. But because language is so powerful, it helps us understand the plot and it becomes exciting. And that's kind of how we design chatbots as well. It's not about having the most natural experience, it's about using natural elements of language to help people achieve their goals.
So I guess, and even for me, I guess it's very easy to confuse that when you talk about human-centered design, that does not mean human-like conversations, because it's not about mimicking a person. It's about focusing on the user and getting their problem solved in the easiest, most natural way possible.
And because people are people, some mimicking, using some of that makes it easier. But it's a means to an end rather than the other way around.
Okay. Now comes the question everybody gets in every interview right now. How has generative AI impacted conversation design? You knew this was coming.
Oh yeah, I knew it was coming. I mean, we've always said that, the way we look at it is you've got the human and you've got technology, and the human is the creator, or was the creator for a long time, and technology was supporting it, AI was supporting it. And what you're going to see now is that AI is going to be more of the creator, and the human is going to be more and more supporting the AI, right? So the difference is just like who's in the driver's seat and who's making sure everything goes well. And for some companies, that transition of people writing the dialogues, because a lot of companies, that's what's happening, right? You have people that figure out the conversation and they write a full script, and then they have technology power it. For some people, or some orgs, it might take 3 years to transition into more an AI-driven solution where people are going to be auditing and making sure that everything goes smoothly. And others might start tomorrow and have generative AI in the driver's seat. So how does that change our approach? Well, at the end of the day, you still want to have good conversations with people, and there's certain quality to a good conversation. There's certain design patterns that need to be in there. If you now look at a lot of the generative AI solutions, they're not very good yet at actually respecting those design patterns. So if you look for voice, there's a pattern: acknowledgement, confirmation, prompt. Like it's, where do you want specific information in a sentence that makes it easier for people to understand.
Of course, that's not what they're designed for. That's what people forget. They're not designed to do every possible thing you can think of.
Exactly. There's not a lot of like good chatbots that these systems are trained on. So that, a lot of it's overtrained on marketing copy, which has a very different rhythm than a good chatbot conversation. So
I actually wanted to ask you about that. You wrote on LinkedIn actually the other day that LLMs are trained more on marketing copy than dialogue, which I see you said again. And I wondered why you think that. I have no idea whether it's right or wrong, but I think when I looked at some of the examples, you see millions of pages of Wikipedia articles, right? This is not marketing copy.
That's
like,
yeah.
what? I guess what do you mean by that, and why is that bad?
So the marketing copy and I guess non-chatbot copy. So if you look at, for example, in marketing writing, what we do a lot of times, we ask a lot of questions because it makes the text more upbeat. It's like, oh, do you ever have this? Do you have that? Are you interested in that? Because it makes it easier to rate for people. So, but in conversation design, what you absolutely do not want, and particularly in voice, is have a question in the middle of your message. Because what you now get, if how are you doing today? You want, and isn't the weather nice, right? So if I ask you a question, you as a user are going to answer that question. But if I then continue to speak, the conversation goes off track immediately.
Yeah.
Right. So you always want to end with the question. So it's very simple, fundamental things like that that a lot of these LLMs do not do right immediately. And you can, of course, design your prompt or request that and do all of those things. But there's very basic chatbot design principles that are not in there. And I for my, it's like, oh, there's a lot of marketing elements that you see in there, or Wikipedia stuff too. Yeah, that also makes a ton of sense. But fundamentally, it's not like it's gone through very, very good chatbots that were properly designed and taking that, right? So that's an interesting thing. But kind of going back to that original question, a good conversation has certain design patterns, and it doesn't really matter to us if you have someone writing those patterns in, or if you just have someone in the room that is making sure that your LLM is actually providing those design patterns to create a good experience for people. So
it's more about following the best practices rather than who's doing it, just that someone's doing it.
Yeah, exactly. And then it doesn't matter if it's an AI or that. So conversation design, what's the conversation that I want to have with people? What should that look like? What's important in that conversation? How it's going to help people in the best way possible? That's conversation design. And somebody writes it or an AI creates it, doesn't really matter. So when people think about, is conversation design still relevant, it kind of depends on your definition. If you think conversation design is somebody writing the dialogue from A to Z, yeah, that's probably going to look very different 5 years from now.
You're skipping ahead now. You're too visionary. You've got to wait for the questions.
Oh, did I just do that?
Oh no. Actually, one idea that came up is, again, what most people don't seem to understand is that large language models, generative AI, they're designed to generate new content from training data. They're not designed to do probably 99.9% of the things we're using them for, right? Such as conversation design. Your criticism, or your point, was that they're not even trained on dialogue data, so therefore they cannot do it. They can't follow the best practices. So I'm wondering, would there be value? Is it something that you have considered to make a smaller language model that is trained specifically or largely on dialogue? Is that something that would be valuable, or is that a crazy idea I just came up with?
I think that is it. I mean, it's interesting. I think I'm pretty sure that actually these large language models have gone through all the movie scripts that exist and are in a database. So there's
but then you just have like, cool Bruce Willis and Arnold Schwarzenegger lines, which maybe is a good user experience.
I can see that for some brands. No, I mean, one thing, as you mentioned, one thing that I will be putting out in the world pretty soon is actually when a message is generated by an AI, it gets tested against design patterns. So you have generic design patterns, and you can add your custom design patterns for your own vocabulary. But also we test it against compliancy rules, business rules that you may have predefined.
Yeah.
So then when an LLM generates a message, we test it against that, we give it a score, and you decide if you then feel comfortable sending it to an end user, or if you say, actually, we're going to send it back and recreate that. So that's one approach to doing this better.
So you're almost using, especially some of the current models that have a lot of context that you can use. So you're almost coming in with a big prompt template and saying, here's all the ground rules, the best practices. And then you're throwing in, this is the situation, generate this, but following all these rules.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then when it goes out, you actually do a final check. So that you're still in control. So, because that's the thing, it's like everybody's talking about guardrails, using AI to check the output of AI and do that, but then who's going to be checking the AI that's checking the, you kind of remove the problem. So this is going to help you create a better prompt, but whatever comes out at the end of the day, it's not like a bouncer at the nightclub that says, okay, yeah, no, you're not wearing that. Okay, no,
you're not on the list.
You're not on the list. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, I
So
actually like that
so
metaphor.
so
Um,
it's a system like that. One simple API, you can add it to whatever stack you have.
okay. Wow. Okay, I've learned something very
You,
cool now.
you got to debut here. Yeah, nobody knows this, but it's out in the open soon anyway.
All right. So you jumped ahead, so I have to now follow up with it. So I don't know, it was maybe a week or so ago, former Gartner analyst
Hmm.
Magnus Ravang, whose name I hopefully pronounced correctly, was arguing that conversation design is just not sustainable because
Hmm.
it requires too much manual effort and
Yeah.
the human ability to predict a near infinite amount of complexity with all of the possible ways, all of the dialects, all of the languages, all of the ways people could express themselves, and that it's just not a sustainable practice. But I'm thinking maybe he
Hmm.
misunderstood from what you just told me.
Well, yeah, this is kind of like, what do you consider conversation design to be, right? So I think that's the, if it's about having a proper conversation, then that continues as a discipline, but the skill set changes slightly. But if you look at this way of doing things, is that sustainable? Um, and yeah, if you read the article and you see all the steps that are involved, it's like all the different phrases people might have for a
Yeah.
specific intent, and then all the different ways that you might want to extract the different entities to solve one problem. That is, if you really want to get the scale, that is not sustainable, and
Yeah.
I completely agree with that. But at the same time, so if I'm an organization and maybe like there's like 10 mission critical journeys that are part of my organization, it's like opening the account, ordering this specific product. There's a few journeys that we know people are going to go through thousands of times per day,
Yeah.
and they're key, right? With that, do you then each time want to use an LLM to generate stuff on the fly, or do you actually one time want to really sit down, figure out what the optimal conversation looks like, build that properly, and have full control over that journey so that you control it end to end and give people a good experience? So, and then still you can use your LLMs and increase scope in different ways, right? So I think you're going to see a mix between those things. Because yes, if you want to do 1,000 use cases, this is not sustainable. But if you've got 10, 15 mission critical journeys in your organization, you got millions of customers going through them per year, you want to be in full control. So I expect a little bit of a mix between that. So you build
Mhm.
those in the old school way for a
Yeah.
while, and then as you start adding to scope, you might get more clever and have stuff generated and use LLMs to just add to that scope faster.
So you're almost saying that for the highest priority, for the most important, highest volume intents or conversations, that in the long term you would almost see those as more manually created with less LLM involvement than sort of the long tail where you would use LLMs more
Yeah,
because they're
yeah.
more
I,
they're
I
more
think
consistent, they're more predictable, and you have 100% control.
Yeah, so I mean, why would you do the API calls each and every time to generate it on the fly if the conversation is going to be fairly similar anyways, right?
No.
It's like ordering
Yeah.
at McDonald's. That's the same conversation that's happening around the world millions of times about ordering
And
that
it never
product.
works
Like
well, and you never hear and you never hear the answer. You're like, what?
that's also true.
Oh,
But
that's
yeah,
some conversation design. Maybe we're gonna offline. We're gonna send you to McDonald's to fix this problem.
I would love that, by the way. But I'm loving it. I'm loving it. But yeah, so I think with these high volume journeys, like control is very important, particularly if you're in finance and those sort of industries where compliance is very important.
Yeah.
Why rely on a black box? And at one point, it's like, yeah, but we can give very detailed prompts to that black box so that we're very much in control of what comes out. But then it almost starts to defeat then the effort that you put into designing the conversation. You just put that design effort into designing that
And
prompt to
yeah.
control the output and sort of limit the variations that you get there. So I think it's going to look a little different per organization of what that balance is between, a generative AI and just designed conversations. But I think the conversation designer's job to sort of bring that home is to define that balance and figure out where to push generative AI and where to just handcraft some of these things and to find that perfect mix. And I think that is what conversation design is, and that what conversation designers will continue to do going forward.
Okay, last question, yes or no? Will conversation design exist in 5 years?
Yes.
You can't really say no.
Then I got to start a new company.
But
yeah. I think we're good.
We have
Everybody's
an idea
safe.
how and why.
It's going to be a very exciting field, and I think for a lot of people that are interested in language and linguistics, that if you enter this field now, you're going to be working with the most exciting AI products in the world and helping millions of people around the world with support, with healthcare, with whatever is on their mind. So I think it's a great field to enter.
Apparently.
That's, well, we still got to solve that problem though.
All right. Well, look, it's been a lot of fun having you. I wish I could extend this out for hours, but I don't think I'm allowed to. So thank you so much for your time, Hans, and we look forward to talking to you again.
All right. Thank you for having me.
All right.